This is tape number 5, interview with Dr. Khadadad Farmانفرمائیان in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Today is November 23rd, 1982, and the interviewer is Habib لاجوردی. I've been listening to the tapes, the 4 tapes that we've recorded so far, and there's certain questions that have occurred to me that perhaps if we could expand on some of the points you've already, some of the subjects you've already discussed, I think it would be helpful and useful to people who will listen to these tapes in the future. The first one is in regard to your relationship and the relationship of your brothers and sisters with your father. Obviously, he was an extremely unique man. Just before we turned on the tape recorder, we were speaking about the relationship between not only the brothers and sisters, but with the third generation children. And this obviously must be a legacy of your father. If you could talk about that, talk about him, how he brought up the children, how you met with him, how he treated you, how he trained you.
Right. I'm glad you think people would be interested in this. I think it's an important part of my cultural background, an important part of Iranian cultural background to understand families of that nature. You must remember, when my father died, I was only a boy of 11, if I'm not mistaken. I was only 11 years old. That's right. He died in 39, and so I was born in 1928, and I was 11 years old. But it is amazing how, even to this day, this man has ever been present in my mind. It is hardly a day passes that I don't think of this man and about this man. He had a pervasive influence on all of us, lasting, deep influence on all of us. I explained the circumstances under which we lived. We had a large compound. He lived with his, at the time, 6 wives. Subsequently, one was added. But when that one was added, we had already moved up to our summer residence in Tajrish, and our townhouse was taken by Reza Shah. In any case, all the wives lived separately with their own children. To give you a perspective, when my father died, there were 20 boys and 20 girls that survived him. But before he died, he lost several children who had grown up already. For example, you may know about Nusrat Dole Firuz, who was variously, over the years, Minister of Finance, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and my brother Abbas Mirza Sar Lashkar, who was Minister of Justice, And another younger brother who was Nizamuddin Mirza, who died as a result of an accident or a disease, I'm not sure of. And still a fourth who had grown up and had died. But on one occasion, I remember distinctly that one of the senior mothers told me that my father had told her just before he died that he had lost 15 children who had come of age. Meaning, I suppose they must have passed sort of their earlier years and entered into their teen years and above. So in full bloom, he had actually had 47 people whom he had bred, that grown up. His main point of life was that, and he made it to us repeatedly, God knows, that we, as his children, should never depend on worldly goods. He kept on insisting that worldly goods would not remain with us, as if he knew the future, as if he knew that we would have ups and downs in life, that we would have revolutions in countries like Persia, as indeed we had, and lost everything. He insisted that we should spend all our inheritance on our education. And he saw to it, while he was alive, of course, that every one of my brothers went to Europe and was educated somewhere at some institution of learning of some respect. After he died, the guardians and our mothers continued the same practice, and at the end of the day, we were all educated from, at the time, Petrograd, which is the Leningrad of today, that is before the revolution. The case of my second oldest brother, Muhammad Hussein Mirza Firuz, General Firuz, who, by the way, lived at the Hermitage, which is now the museum, but used to be the Winter Palace of the Tsars, and was educated there as an officer of the guard. And before that, in France. From Petrograd to Portland, Oregon to Seattle, Washington. Right across the two continents, including, of course, one of my brothers who graduated right at the time of the war. In fact, he stayed during the war in Germany. That's Kaveh. Belgium, Jamshid, that you may know, and Sabbar, if I'm not mistaken, partly. France, England, then the youngest wave went to the United States. That is after the Second World War. After my father was dead, then we all went to the United States. And there we had covered all the states, boys and girls. There isn't a member of my family among the brothers and sisters alive who at least didn't succeed in completing college. I counted once, there must be well over 10 of us who have PhDs. In various fields. We have historians, we have medical doctors, we have mechanical engineers, we have electronic engineers, we have even economists, believe it or not. Entomologists, biologists. I remember when we were children, we used to visit him, and it wasn't like a regular situation of a home where the father would sit there every night and the children would gather around him. Nothing of the sort. We had to be summoned to see him from time to time at his pleasure, for his purposes. If, for example, he had a few of his friends visiting at lunch or dinner, he would select a child or decide that the child should attend, and that child would be called in to attend that particular lunch or that particular dinner. Other than that, there was a standing dinner with him on Thursday evenings, where we all sat down and our mothers stood around taking care of us, including the servants, of course. And he sat at the top of the long table, sort of beaming down upon us with such great pleasure. After those dinners, I remember...
Just the younger children or older children?
These are generally younger children, because the older children had their own family already. They had open court. They could come in and go as they pleased. Those who were adults already weaned off, so to speak, such as I remember Nosrat Tole, and who was already in his own right a great man in the parliament and so on. Or, for that matter, Madali Mirza, who is my second oldest, and now the oldest living brother. The older one who had married off and gone off were free to come and go, but this was the younger children that he wanted to collect around himself on Thursday nights. And on Friday mornings, the brother who was the oldest would line us up outside of his sitting room, which was a very large place. And
who would that be, the oldest?
Depends on who was available. I remember in my case, the oldest brother was always Abul Bashar, who was available. That is, he was not in Europe being educated or elsewhere being educated. He was he was in Iran.
And how many of you would there be?
For example, at these times that I remember, that happened to me, we were something like 15 of us. He would line us up on Friday mornings. Of course, we were all cleaned up previously at home and wore our best suits. And he would march us in before the old man who was sitting at his breakfast with his eyeglasses, and he would beam and we would stand at attention in front of him, and he would say 1, 2, 3, and then we would all bow to him, and then again stand at attention. He would get up. He would stand holding to the back of a chair, doing his leg exercises so he can get to move. Don't forget, this time that I'm talking about, he was 85 years old. And he was afflicted by all kinds of infirmities of old age, you know. He would then talk to us about our education, about our future. He would tell one brother, he would tell one brother to go and become an engineer. He said, and if you can't become an engineer, you be a plumber. To another one, he'd say, be a carpenter. You see, he had a full sense of the importance of technology and the future of the world. He knew that the type of life that he had led himself was impossible to be continued. He knew we had to have our skills. He knew we had to have our education. He knew that we have to learn sciences in order to be useful to a future society. And this was from day to day, week to week, just pounded into our heads. It was a continuous phenomenon that we should be educated. Now, after this, he would come and walk in front of us with one of the servants holding a box of candy behind him, hard candies. And he would kiss each one of us, go right down the line, and put one candy in our mouth. And then he'd go back again to his chair. Of course, during all this time, the girls were totally free. They didn't have to stand at attention. They didn't have to stand in line. I remember girls just mauled all over him. They would sit on his lap. And we were extremely jealous of this because we didn't understand at the time. But he was extremely soft with women. With us, at best, that one peck on the face, and that's it. The rest was a very formal relationship. And we always addressed him as Qurban. بله قربان، نه خیر قربان. After all, don't forget, he was a prince, he was a prime minister years before all of this that I'm referring to. He was a man of state, he was minister of war, 50 years before all of this. No, 40 years before all of this. And in his own right, he ruled, so much of Persia as governors. And in those days, as you know, governors were just little kings. But this man had a deep wisdom that did not create the impression that he was just an old empty box used to some ways and forms. There was a great deal of substance in his handling of us, in his handling the 7 wives, in keeping an administration going, in the way he audited our daily education, in the way he audited our health programs. He was legion for this. First of all, you must remember the secretariat, alone his secretariat, which handled all these matters and directly reported to him, not to the wives, just to him.
This is one person.
Who were located in his very palatial mansion. It was a palace, certainly in our sense of the word, for the times, as compared to our houses. And this was a large place, which housed, in the lower floor, several very interesting things, just to mention. One was a tea house, that is, where tea was prepared and refreshments were prepared for the guests to bring up. That in itself was a very large place with several people who worked in it. Next to that was our central telephone operator, who I still remember was a very nice man who operated the telephone system for the whole household. Next to that was the bureau full of clerks, 10, 12 clerks who sat there and dealt with various aspects, such as accounting, such as the reporting, such as communication with schools, communication with the government, communication with his children abroad. And then he had one particular person, we called Monsieur, who went between Iran and Europe. He was 6 months in Europe, 6 months in Iran, just liaising, as you say. It was a liaison between the children who were in Europe and their schoolmasters and my father.
He was an Iranian?
He was that yes, Ali Asghar Saad. He was a very famous man who was his clerk, and we called him Monsieur. There was a great deal of substance to this household. It wasn't just a household where we slept and ate. There was much to it. And all the stories that I have about what went on, I hope one day to be able to write some of my own memories. God knows every one of us should write, because it's only the collection of all these different memories which would make sense about this man, about our circumstances, about the way we lived. We lived a simple life. Don't let me create the impression that we lived like in the greatest of possible luxury. On the contrary, I remember he made us all wear, for example, kazeruni, which was the local textile which had just developed in Iran. And I have never forgotten that I hated this material because it cut my legs and it cut my neck. The rubbing of this rough, crude material to my neck and my legs. I hated it, but still it was standing over there that we buy this textile because it was Persian made, and all of us were tailored into them. We had tailors who came and just measured us and made it for all of us. Girls, although, were separately treated again. Girls were always allowed a bit of, fluff and lace and so on. This was something which couldn't be changed. But the boys were treated that way. Then the greatest of luxuries we had were the distribution of gifts on Nowruz, for example. But he had developed a system, for example, of connecting the gifts with the performance in the school. He never punished us physically. Rarely, ever. He punished, not only he didn't punish us, he had admonished our mothers and servants not to use physical punishment. But he certainly punished us through other systems when we did poorly in the school. And one of the systems he used was to give us, although he would still give you a gift at Nowruz, but he gave you an inferior gift if you hadn't done well, let's say, in the school the term before.
What sort of gifts would these be?
The gifts varied. For example, I remember in my case, I'd done badly in Quran, you know. This is a very great story of my lifetime. What I went through with our Bible, Quran. I just couldn't understand the text. We weren't supposed to have translations. Nobody knew the meaning of the words. Everybody read it, and I was supposed to parrot it. And I just had a revulsion for it, developed a revulsion for it. I couldn't, since I didn't understand. And I was a child of 7 at the time, 6 or 7, this story. Oh, there are teachers, are private teachers. Everybody was there to help me, but still I wouldn't respond. And when I brought bad grades, that Nowruz I received a Japanese bicycle, which all of us hated. It was clear punishment. In those days, Japanese bicycles were no good. Japanese or German bicycles, for that matter. What we all wanted was the English bicycles. The Setofangdar, I remember or Hercules bicycle. And a younger brother received the Hercules. And in my case, I received the Japanese bicycle. Within a week, the mechanism was gone. It just wouldn't work anymore. So actually, I was very cheap compared to English bicycles also. He would use this type of systems. Anyway, when I received the bad grade once, I've written this story someplace. Maybe I'll give it to you as a part of this if you think there is interest. Yeah, I've written this story, this particular vignette about my problem in connection with Quran and the reading of Quran. But I think it's too long a story to engage your tapes with.
Tell me about the relationship between the wives and the children of different wives. It's very. It seems very unusual for the unity that exists in your family to exist when you come from. You would think that there'd be much hostility and competition and conflict between such children, and yet there doesn't seem to be. What is the reason for that?
First of all, let me not pretend that there was no jealousy, that everything was perfect, that our relationship was perfect. What was the case of my father was just a balance that he maintained in a very human situation. Don't forget, when you have 6 wives, you cannot change the nature of the human being. There must have been jealousies between mothers. Certainly there was. But the power of this man was so strong that he would not allow these pettinesses or these jealousies to emerge, to come to the front. He kept them dormant. That was his genius. He kept them dormant. He prevented these jealousies from becoming exacerbated and then becoming an open fight, an open war. This is where his genius was. And this was just administering human beings. He had learned this. He had been a great administrator all his life.
Did you ever observe an example of this? What would you do?
One, he kept us separately. The mother was totally independent in her own home, with her children, her servants, her kitchen. You see, we had all separate means altogether. But Joanna forgets it.
So that a need for interaction was minimized between these households.
Yes. So we had our own centers of things. We had our own independence. The mother ruled her own domain. There was no doubt about that.
So none of the wives lived in his.
Nobody. He lived alone. He lived separately. There was a eunuch who had freedom of all the households, who would be sent. I remember his name was Agha Hussein, you know, Agha Bakhain. Agha Hussein, he was a little guy. He was a black man. And there was also a small black woman who was his trusted keeper of the storage of his personal storage house, in which the greatest of candies and the greatest of delicacies were kept away from all of us, you know, for his special guests and so forth. Anyway, this man would simply come and summon one of the wives to come for whatever purpose it was, whether he had something to say, or whether that every night one wife had to be with him, to stay with him the whole of the night. So one wife would always go up and stay. At the end of his life, as I remember, of course he would impose on the youngest ones, by definition. Not only because they were young as women, but also because they had more strength to maintain this old man. The older ladies now couldn't. Don't forget, some of the older ladies were 50 years senior to my mother, 40 years senior to my mother. You know, Izzat Dawle, the daughter of Muzaffar Shah, the first wife of my father, must have been, 40 years senior to my mother. My mother was a young girl compared to them. And the others, too. So my mother was called in much more often than the other wives. Then he was judicious. Another way, he was quite judicious in treatment of the children. That is, in spite of appeals of various mothers for giving favorable treatment to their own children, he would still come down with a very judicious judgment regarding the children. He would not give undue gifts to one and none to the other. He would not punish one and not the other. He would not encourage one and not the other. He was extremely even-handed in his treatment of the children. And so was he, and this is a very interesting point for you, in the distribution of his wealth among the children. He made sure that he did fairly well by the children. There is an exception. The exception is this: those children who grew up while he was alive could get away with much more because they had direct contact with the man, and what was more, they had their own families, they had their own status to maintain. Whereas, for example, in the case of a younger child, he was being taken care of. He didn't have servants, he didn't have responsibilities to the society as such. He didn't have to have greater means or he didn't have to have equal means as the older brothers or sisters. He was judicious. He also made sure that all of us receive proper medical treatment, almost like an army. The mothers were under instruction to provide the children with quinine, for example, every week or every 2 weeks, depending on the circumstances, depending if they had seen cases of malaria. And as a preventive medicine, this large household would be given quinine. He would immediately visit the minute he heard the child was sick. This was almost a ritual with him, to be sure that the servants, often uneducated, and the mothers, sometimes not as disciplined as he would have liked to see them, were sure that the medicine was properly ministered to the children and not the wrong medicine. He would ask them to rehearse for him the treatment that the doctor had told them. Then he would give the child all the assurance that he's going to be well, and he would leave. Now that gave the child a great deal of security. Although he was distant from us as a father, yet, this type of behavior, the fact that we knew he would read every one of our grades, that he would question us on each one of our courses, and then write comments on them and send them back to the school. He would dictate comments to a clerk on all our report cards. Every term, the report cards went to him. This was a continuous attention. We knew that he will find out. We knew if we did bad in the school, he would know it immediately. There was no doubt at all in our minds. We knew there was concern. We felt the concern. It was a dominant phenomenon. He was dominant in our household. He was ever present in our household. No punishment, but we feared him. No physical punishment, but we still feared him. That was the type of man that he was. Now, we would come to the garden. Don't forget now, you conceive of an oval type of garden, around which, at the top of which, you have his palace, and around it, these houses. You can imagine what happens after the school hours. They just pour into the garden. All of us, variously, 15, 20, 10, depends on the circumstances.
Going to different schools, or all of you going to the same school?
Again, we were bunched very often. The girls naturally went to different schools. Those days, girls' school was separate from boys' school. The girls went to different schools. We would bunch together, and boys and girls, we played in this big garden. And as we played, we tended to choose our own age groups, and we became more than just brothers and sisters. We became friends. We had a football team. We had our bicycles. We had our outings with our tutors to the mountains as groups. So it was just like school in itself. We had our films, our movie. In those days, there were no movie houses. But my father had a movie in his own house, and we would be all invited to sit for the movie, and this was such a great occasion. And I remember, funny enough, when the hero and the heroine would kiss each other, the man who was showing the movie would put his hand in front of the camera so the boys and girls don't see the kissing, you see. We had in that garden, he had his own kitchen at the end of the garden, a very big kitchen. And food was brought by one of these covered trucks up to the top. You must remember, so many people were eating at his own palace, large number of people. The wage bill of my father, I was told this later on, at this time was 1,500 a month. That is, 1,500 people were receiving wages from our household. Not all in this garden, but outside of the garden for the whole system of his administrations of some estimated 180, 200 villages also. There were trucks which brought food from the villages directly to the household, including chickens, I remember, and rice, and from Kermanshah, the oil that was used. And these were again judiciously distributed among the households as between mothers and children. He had the practice of sending us at a very young age to Europe. And once he had made up his mind, there was little consultation to be made with the mothers or anybody. He would just inform the mother that 2, 3, this one, that one, they're going to Europe. He never sent the girls to Europe. He had the girls educated at home as well as in the local school. But of course, girls went to Europe later on for the continuation of their education. After he died, all my sisters came abroad for education. But in those early days, my elder sisters remained at home, and of course, soon enough, they were married off to various husbands. Yes, it is a great story.
So when he died, was there a big vacuum in supervision of the family?
That there weren't that many very small children left. There must have been, when I look back, about 10 of us, yes. But then, don't forget, the president of the Senate, the president of the Parliament, the president of the Central Bank, of Bank Melli. These were guardians, and our guardians. And my oldest brother, Madbali Mirza, and the mothers attended a committee of guardianship where they discussed these matters. And of course, once he was gone, we didn't have this dominant power on which we could rely. We didn't have this source of security, if you wish. He was a great source of security to all of us. We felt it. We knew as long as he's there, we're all right. But then, very shortly afterwards, after his death, most of us were sent abroad anyway. Some of us to Beirut because of the war circumstances. We couldn't go to Europe. And shortly after, of course, all to Europe and the United States. We were to receive our education. I have yet to meet a person in Persia when I return who didn't refer to this phenomenon of my household, who didn't talk about my father's genius in terms of educating his brood, this large group of children. There were many people who were as rich or richer than my father. And the children were brought up in a traditional way of, I don't know, hunting and just enjoying life. And at the end of the day, without much education to help them throughout life. When I returned to Iran, I hardly had anything that my father had left me.
I was going to ask you about that.
Hardly had anything that my father had left me. Yet, I had no fear whatsoever. In spite of the fact that I was already married to Joanna and with 2 little children, I had no fear whatsoever that I'll have difficulty living. In fact, I rented a house from one of my sisters, homies, you know, and lived in that house. I had a piece of land which I had sold earlier and invested in Coca-Cola and so on. This was all became bankrupt, gone anyway. Never got much out of it.
This was Coca-Cola of Iran. Franchise in Tehran.
We didn't have the franchise of Tehran. We had Isfahan and Khuzestan. It was mismanaged. Nobody would go there. Nobody handled it. Slowly. Another phenomenon is this. I remember I wanted to build a house, and I just didn't have money. The central bank would give me a certain amount loan. I went to my brothers. I needed to put down some equity myself, naturally, you know. And 2 brothers, one was Tari, who was killed in that shooting accident, and Manucher, my other brother, who had owned jointly a piece of land, simply told me, go sell that piece of land and the money is yours. And I did it immediately, paid off, and started my house, to build my house. It took me 4 years to build it because I had to stop construction every 6 months once the money was finished, but still, I ended up with a very nice house. Another trick that now I remember when I talked about this, that my father used to use to keep us together. He would distribute one piece of land among 15 sons. This practice of giving this one piece to one person and another piece to another person, he did this as a matter of keeping us together forever. Because of this interest. He would, for example, bequeath an hour of water, as you know, water in those days by hours and so on, to 15 children, 15 sons. It was very often that he distributed his properties to several children at the same time. And by the way, when he said 15, they weren't all from one mother, you see.
Sure.
It didn't make any difference.
You think this was intentional?
Absolutely it was intentional. I have no doubt it was intentional. Why would a man give? I mean, he had 15 hours of water. To be sure, he could have given each 1 hour of water. But he wouldn't do it that way. He wouldn't do it that way. He wanted us to be connected with each other and supportive of each other, or having at least some interrelationship with each other the rest of our lives. And this is what you started your question with. And it has so remained. This is the most amazing thing. It has so remained. Now, I started by saying that I cannot deny jealousies and competition. Oh, I think all my life there has been competition among our brothers and sisters. There is no doubt about it. Yet there has been this relationship. We competed against one another, to be sure. But because we felt an urge that it's the other, that it's some standard that we have to satisfy. And that standard was only within us that we had to satisfy. If I competed with my brother, it was because I thought my brother was hitched to a standard that presumably had come down from my father. We knew always what he wanted. We knew he wanted excellence. As if I didn't make it, I would be ashamed in front of my brother far more than ever in front of you as a friend. Because he was the only person I had to answer to. My brothers and sisters were the people I had to answer to. Not that I was ever questioned by them as such, but this standard remained in our head and we operated on that basis. In that sense, there was competition, to be sure. There was never, as I told you, my father had all his children. His properties were divided into 52 shares. That is, you know, under Islamic law, the boys received 2 shares and the girls 1. So there were 20 boys. They received 40 shares, and the girls received 12 shares. 52 ways of all his properties being divided up into 52 parts. This involved us the whole of our lifetime. Of course, this distribution he could have given outside of this distribution to individuals also, and he did to many who had grown up and so. But those things that had remained were by law divided up in 52 shares among all of us.
So you were partners in many,
we were
financially,
constantly partners. Another interesting phenomenon. As I grew up, I remember, for example, even on a financial basis, I was sometimes closer to a brother from another mother than to the brother from the same mother. He always sort of wiped out this thought that a mother may have put into our head that you are separate, you are different from your other brothers and sisters, by simply eliminating the importance of coming from another mother. He pressed the point that you're brothers and sisters. There was an affinity. There is a love. As I look at least into myself, you know, love is a subjective thing. It's very difficult to decide, to be sure. You can't define it. As I look into myself, I've always loved my brothers and sisters. I've always been happy to see them. I've always wanted to be with them. Where it comes from, I don't know. But when I see them with me, I see a height of excitement that shocks me also. Even today, when we are together, there is a height of excitement, which is extremely interesting. Have you had enough of my family?
Yeah, let me now bring it to time-wise forward a bit. What would you say have been, when you look back on your career and your relationship in government and politics and so on, what have been the advantages and what have been the disadvantages of being a member of this large, distinguished family?
If I were to be born once again, I wouldn't want anything changed. I've often asked my own brothers and sisters this too. I would not exchange the circumstances of my birth. I would not exchange my childhood. I would not exchange my teen years. And my adult experience, which is separate phenomena, it becomes my own. If I were to be born again, I'd like to go through exactly the same thing. Maybe this is too much of an ego, maybe this is too much to say, but that's how I feel as a person about it. Nobody that I have met among my generation has ever experienced the excitements of life and the joy of life that I have had. Maybe principally because of this large family, because of this phenomenon, because of this excitement, because of this constant news, because of constant standards that were set, because we were waiting for this one to become to leave university and become a medical doctor, and for that one to become a minister, for the other one to be sent to Europe. It was a live household. It was a genuinely live household. We had secrets with each other. My brothers and I talked about girls to each other. I'm sure the girls talked about boys to one another. We shared these secrets with one another. There was a community in the full sense of the word. And there was a romance to this community, great romance to this community. All my life, exception of these last few years, we were held in high esteem by our society. I don't have any complaints. Sure, there are jealousies. Sure, there were problems. I mean, jealousies. God knows why there are jealousies, but then there are. If you're better to do, if you wear better clothes, if you live better, even your peers may be jealous of you. But that happens anywhere. That is everywhere. That's not something that...
Well, it seems that the network that you had of so many brothers and sisters, all educated in different fields and professions, you were able to at least supply each other with extremely valuable data, information as to what was going on, and to help each other, put in a good word for each other.
I'm glad you raised that. I should have talked about that. Many people thought we were a mafia of a sort, that we were so interrelated, that we had secret meetings of some sort, that we gathered, and there was the eldest who sat there as the doyen and told this one what to do and that one what to do. And then we were watchful of the interests of the other constantly. There is nothing furthest from the truth. This is the interesting phenomenon that I want to point out. We were such amazing individuals in our own right, each and every one of us. As I said, I don't care if anybody accepts this or not, but now this has all passed and I can speak easily without any problem. I don't care if anybody believes it. Each one of us are such individuals. We gathered together, and by the way, I never remember that all of us ever were in one place. It was just physically impossible, you know. Always some of us in Europe, some back home. Even after we were all educated and we were back home, a lot of them were traveling constantly and so on. We could never collect in one place. But we have had large gatherings and on a regular basis, meeting at the home of this brother, that sister, and so on. These were family occasions where the talk ranged from sex to politics to money to what do we do about, for example, this brother was this problem in this sense that if there was such a brother who had raised the problem. Normally, as I said, in cases of finances, I would only go to 2 or 3 of them. I wouldn't go to every brother and sister. because I happened to be closest to them. They were my close friends. That's just like yourself, Habib. I mean, if I were to think to whom to come and talk to about, let's say, my financial problems, as a person outside of my family, naturally I only would have 2 or 3 people to go to say, now look, I have a problem, can you help me? This is true of yourself, too, of many people. You don't go around into the family council and say, now look, although there were such cases. When I left the plan organization, I had a very heavy debt. I was building my house, and I was using an overdraft at the bank, and the overdraft suddenly, about a week before I left.
This is in 73?
3. I was informed that the overdraft had become very large and I should do something about it. The bank is worried. That I may not have the ability to repay the bank. It was in the neighborhood of, I'll tell you, it was exactly 260,000 to month. And at the time, I didn't even have 4,000 to month in cash when they gave me this notification. Of course, my salary was on a regular basis, which was around 20,000 to month at the time, was put into this account. But I thought to myself that, look, you're leaving the plan organization. You can't leave the plan bank. This was the bank of the plan with such large debt. Something has to be done. What to be done? I had nothing to sell. I had nobody to go to. The government wasn't about to give me a bonus. I had no retirement. It's a very funny situation. Because I was resigning. Once you resign, you lose all these things. And Mr. Obeida, I mean, after all, I had a fight with the Prime Minister. I was leaving him, and he wasn't about, and I wasn't about, he wasn't about to give me a bonus, and I wasn't about to request a bonus or accept one. I called in Cyrus, my brother, put the problem to him. Cyrus, if you remember at the time, was co-chairman or deputy chairman of a family industry which is called Nafta Pars. Please remind me as an incident of our cooperations to give you a particular case. I called him in because he was the closest brother I ever had. We grew up together since we were 2 years old. I remember him from the time he was 2 years old. That well. All over the years. In England, in Beirut, in England, in the United States. I just loved him, and he was so close to me. So, I said, Cyrus, I've got to pay this debt. And for your information, I'm resigning, but nobody else knows this. I have resigned, but I promised the Prime Minister not to tell anybody. I have to tell you because of this financial problem. You're close to me, don't tell anyone. But before I leave the plan organization, I've got to clear this debt. He said, how many days do I have? I said, maximum a week. Within a week, he came back, deposited a check. There was a check in my account. It was 266,000. He wanted me to have some extra cash to be able to live for the next, let's say, few days as well. Later on, when I asked him about the story, he simply told me that he went about to some other brothers that he would choose to go about. That's the point. Asked each to help, Each one of them gave 10, 20, 30,000. He succeeded in collecting 160 or 70,000, and he put in another 100,000 personally from his own funds.
This was a loan, or?
This is another aspect. I never this had happened to me before when I had resigned from the government and I had no salaries and walked the streets. I used to go every day and collect money for my living expenses from my brothers, various brothers. Like this, where I went to the office and say, I need money, do you have money? He would put, the particular brother that I asked, 2 or 3, 4 of them, one was Abul Bashar, for example, would put his hand in his pocket and come out and say, here is 500 tuman that I have, you take 3 and I keep 2. You know. There was never an accounting between us. Unless it was a formal thing, that is, I may have sold, as we did, a piece of land to my brother, and that way there was an accounting, obviously. But in this term, very often I was in Europe, another brother in Europe, he paid the bill at the end of the day without me asking. This type of relation, right or wrong, that did exist among us. And to this day it is true. To this very day it is true that this relationship exists. And will continue to exist because it is a form of cooperation, you want to call it, joint support, generosity, which is within us. In a way, we feel this way towards one another, and to some extent, as you know, towards our friends. We Persians generally like that also. I don't think we have that much accountability among ourselves. So Cyrus did this, and I had occasion to reverse the favor. When at later dates I went into private work and I was doing consulting and so on, I remember at one point he needed some funds urgently or something. I was immediately able to provide it to him. This give and take was there. And it didn't matter if I didn't have it, and if I couldn't provide it to him, he would have gone to another brother or something. So this was a marvelous relationship, as I said, which just cannot be replicated in other circumstances that existed.
But on occasions where your position could have created at least a semblance of conflict of interest. Perhaps as governor of the central bank, you had a brother who managed a bank, or as head of the plan organization, you had a brother who was a consulting engineer or a contractor. What did you do about that? What was that?
In all cases, I had the habit of assigning one of the, usually my deputy, and on a request, these people are alive, on a request that I do not want to know anything, whatever is fair, whatever they're due, give it to them. But then it's known among those who are familiar. All during my tenure of office, in the plan organization, for example, Pur Rashid and Farooq, who had a large firm of engineers, never received one piece of work. Never received one piece. That's what Rashid always told me afterwards. Not one piece of work. Whatever work they had, and they were doing during that period, the 3 years that I was in the plan, was given to them by Asfiya beforehand. In the case of Aziz, To this day, he doesn't forgive me. Because I genuinely fought a project, not because my brother happened to be its architect. No, because I loved him, I believed in his architect. When I wanted to build my own house, after all, I went to him and he gave me a free plan for my own house. To this day, Aziz has not forgiven me because I took the harshest position with His Majesty on the building of the stadium, of the Aryame Stadium. To the extent that there were at least 5 letters from Moinian quoting the Shah, instructing me to give the work and on the extension of the works for a stadium of Aryame. And at that, I never handled the work directly in any way. Left it fully with the understanding to 2 deputies. One was Muqaddam, the other was Ratbeh. And they're the harshest individuals I could ever find. But they're very decent people at the same time. I mean, they wouldn't penalize my brother, let's put it that way. They were very hard but even-handed persons, both, to go and check and make decisions yourself. And also, what is more, the projects were never signed in the plan organization at all. The projects were signed by Amuzegar, as a matter of fact, of the Abadani Maskan, of the gross for construction and housing. I was extremely sensitive, regretfully so, about this question that you raised, because of the name. Because of the name. Then you raise the question, what about disadvantages? The advantages have been so sweeping, the advantages. One of the advantages was, I'll be honest with you, in a country like ours, because of my name, so many doors were open to me. I'll say it, that was a fact of life. I enjoyed that. I could walk to the office of any prime minister. This wasn't true of everybody. My name, my card was enough. Probably the prime minister knew my father, and if he didn't, his father was the closest friend of my father. You know, this type of relationship that we have had in our country, our society, as it were. Every door was open. In that sense, we had great advantages. Yes, that is true. But disadvantages, the natural jealousies. And as you saw after the revolution, my family was the only family, probably with the exception of Pahlavi, who was treated en masse because of a name. I remember when Bazargan introduced the law for protection of industry, which meant taking away the industry, nationalizing, and so on. They talk about Mahmoud so and so, Hassan so and so. But they always say فامیل فرمانفرمائیان. The family of Farman included, the family of Farman included women at 86, men at 93 years old, and children at 2 years old, children 3 years old, children 14-year-old girls. I wrote a letter on this to the government, of course. But there it was. There was a name to this family. People thought that this family, you know, was a sort of a united, extremely rich. You know this. In our own rights, I don't know any member of my family who would even to be considered, any one of them, to be put in terms of wealth among the, let's say, top even 100. Far from it. Not even one. This is a large family now I'm talking about. After all, most of them well-to-do. Not a one would reach that level of top 100, I wouldn't say even top 200. Not a one. But all of us, if you add up, every one of us, and put together, obviously we will qualify. But don't forget, all of us were individuals. You can collect a whole group of individuals also in Iran, add them up, they'll have a lot of money. But I had my own home. I had my own interests. For example, Ghaffar, as you know, ran Bank Tehran and had the major shares in Bank Tehran, one of my brothers. I never had one share in Bank Tehran. I didn't choose to go into that. Whereas, for example, very often when my brothers wanted to invest money, they all approached other brothers and said, would you like to come and share in this investment? There were many brothers and sisters, I wasn't one of them, until I left the government, who had shares, for example, in Naftapars. But there were many others as well, besides the members of the family. It was only natural in our society that you would turn to your members of the family as your own family, as you know this, and get together and put money together to undertake an investment. That way we cooperated with each other, to be sure. So, there is a brief statement, I think, about. Is there anything else on the family that you're curious about?
Well, if I could come back to it later as it occurs, I'd like to go to something else now. There's been a lot of criticism by people, for instance, such as Dr. Amini, regarding the introduction of well-educated but inexperienced individuals being placed at high governmental positions. I mean, they talk about this fellow just gets off a plane with a PhD and they make him minister, deputy minister, this or that. Now, in a way, I may be mistaken. In a way, you were the first of this breed, or one of the first of this breed, that came and entered a new field, and your education apparently qualified you to take on extreme heavy responsibility. I'm wondering if you can look back on this aspect of your own experience first, and then maybe generalize it, and see what were the benefits, pluses and minuses of this, and if one were to do it over again, the conflicts that it created with the old-timers and all the other things that you know so well.
I really think that is a tremendous question you're asking. I've spent the last 3 years reflecting on as honestly as I can. And it's very difficult to be honest, because after all, again, these things are subjective. You have your own perception of things. Others had different perceptions. I've tried to reconstruct myself in the early days, and you're quite right. I was among them. Certainly, I was the most well-known of them.
Actually, a term Massachusetts was coined, wasn't it?
Much more than that. Much more than that. By the way, when I came, I wasn't that much of a Massachusetts, as you know. But I was, in the sense that I was at Harvard and Princeton and so In this quest for the truth, for an objective picture, I don't think I've succeeded yet. But I've sort of found some areas within which I allow myself to talk, within which I can talk objectively. And I don't know whether I'll succeed in giving you the full picture, but I will ultimately, because as I told you, I'm preparing these two talks, one at Harvard, one at MIT, purely on my reflections from 1958 to 1978. And what I'm looking at changing images, at changing perspectives, at changing perceptions within myself. How I was then, how I looked at the world at that time, and how I'm looking at the world today. If I can only succeed in spelling out, or in drawing out, in painting this picture truthfully, I think I can come out with a lot of answers to the very question that you're saying. And I don't have any other guinea pig to use in this laboratory except myself. And believe me, it has been one of the most excruciating experiences of my life to try to go back, understand what I was then, and see over the years what happened to myself. In terms of my thinking, in terms of my emotions, in terms of the changing value system. What was important then, what is important now? I haven't got it worked out yet. Maybe I will. Maybe I will. And if I do, if I ever wrote, certainly I'll make it a part and parcel of this writing, of this oral history, and give it to you, which I have no difficulty giving to anything. I can be as open, as honest, and it doesn't bother me in the slightest. When we came first, and I apologize, let me refer to I as myself, but all the time when I say I, in some way I'm representing a group of people like myself. But you must remember, there was, even within this group, this so-called or so-thought homogeneous group, there were variations. Please remember this. Variations in terms of background, in terms of experience, in terms of education, in terms of intelligence, in terms of character, in terms of loyalties, and so on. But allow me, so let me refer to I with that understanding. This I, as already told you, was, 12 years old, sent abroad away from Iran at the age of 12. By then, what I knew about Iran naturally was limited. In my particular case, as for example, I compare it with my own son, my Persian was very strong. Because at the age of 7, we were reading Golistan Saadi with tutors. This was my father, who insisted on understanding of Persian literature from the very early ages. We were quoting poetry for him. This was his greatest pastime. After those Thursday dinners that I referred to earlier, all we would collect around him, he would sit on a chair, and we would sit on the ground around him, and we would start moshaere, this game of poetry, you know. And then we will go around until people are eliminated, and finally a champion would remain. The champion will get, I don't know, a gold piece, and the rest of us will get a silver piece or something. we grew up in a religious household also. Our mothers were generally religious. My grandmother, my God, was the most religious person in the world. So it wasn't that I didn't understand religion or religious background of Iran. It wasn't that I didn't understand the tradition. After all, many a time I went to sleep by the very stories of my grandmother or my maternal grandmother. I never saw my paternal grandmother, of course. My maternal grandmother, who would tell us the stories which related to the Persian tradition, which related even to her background, which was tradition. I had a dose. I had a sense about Persia, to be sure. I had a feeling for Persia, to be sure. I had a feeling for Persian community, not the, as I am accused because of my name and because of my background, because of my father, only of the elite. No, no, no. My mother was a peasant woman. My grandmother was a very simple peasant, uneducated peasant woman. After all, she was married to the gardener of my father. And my mother was the daughter of the gardener of my father. I mean, that part of me was a very interesting part, which I hope I'll have a chance to talk to you about when and how I reaped the benefits of it during the revolution. They would tell us about village life. I knew about the Persian village life. In this sense, I was imbued with a dual spirit. On the one hand, of this simple village life that my mother grew up under, or my grandmother certainly grew up under, and then of this household that I described on the other side of my father's. I had some senses. But 12 years is still a very early age. We were sent out to the American University of Beirut, to the prep. There we lived in dormitories with Arab students, with Middle Eastern students, with some European students at the time, but all American teachers. God bless them, whether they're alive or not. Excellent teachers. I have never forgotten them. Who taught us English? Who taught us English literature? Who taught us mathematics? We knew some before we came. Who tried to keep a Persian course going, also in Persian language, for the Persian group at the prep school in Beirut. But there again, soon enough I graduated. That community was a sort of a stepping stone to Europe. I was moving away from Persia and being prepared to enter a European or an American college. The only time I came back to Persia was the summer that I graduated from Beirut, and I stayed in Iran for a maximum of 2.5 months. During those 2.5 months, I spent most of it in Hamadan and Asadabad, where our family villages were located. I visited these villages. I saw how people worked. I saw poverty. I got some notions about the relationship between landlord and tenants, landlords and peasants. And in that sense, I had a smell, if you wish, I had a feeling, if you wish, of the Persian village or the rural areas once again. After that, I flew off to England, never to return until something like 11 years later. These 11 years, I went to English colleges. I learned economics. I learned about Marx. I learned about Adam Smith. Followed into the United States, I learned about American history. I learned the American culture. I became a part of an American family. I was dominated by the American mores, American values. It was fully, deeply imbued into me. Above all, I began slowly to become versed in a new knowledge, a new approach to looking at realities, a new method of examining realities, which my science, economics, taught me and required of me. This way, I was slowly formed in a milieu which you must remember. When you talk about Stanford University and compare it with the Tehran of that day or the Hamadan of that day, there was a world, centuries of difference between the two. I had a new mentality. I was trained to techniques that could only be taught to us at these universities. I looked at the world differently than I did when I was 12 years old in Persia. I had a whole different value system at the end of the day when I received my PhD. My interests in thought certainly had changed. Not that I'm saying at 12 years old I had well-known, clear-cut interests in humanities or in sciences or anything of this sort, but I'm saying what was developed had certainly a different basis than the basis I had when I left Persia. We were naturally enough enamored of the Western civilization. We were naturally enough enamored of the Western technology. We were naturally enough, enamored is not a kind word to use. We were imbued, we accepted. We had to become proficient, as a matter of fact, in the Western mode of thinking, the Western technology, the understanding of Western technology, the understanding of Western science, the understanding of Western history, in order to be able to get our various degrees at the hallowed universities of great universities of the in the Western world. All this time, I had very little contact with Persia. I had little contact with Persian thought, except from occasional Persian friends who were going to school with me. We weren't really all that aware of what's going on in Persia. And when Mossadegh, for example, came to power, to be sure, there was a pride in us as students who were thousands of miles away from Iran. Tremendous pride in us. But we really didn't know what was going on. We would read newspapers about him. But there was a natural sense for us to want to defend him. It wasn't founded. It wasn't deep enough. Our information was not a continuous source from our own country. We didn't in detail know the individual actors within our own country. Who was who? who were the important actors? What were the value of these actors? What was affecting the masses in the country, even under Mossadegh? Or for that matter, what did really the Shah was like? What did he believe in? What was the dominant philosophy in the country? I remember, if you had asked me in those days, I would have said, we don't have a philosophy. We're just moving around. There are no organization. There's only corruption. Yes. There were reactions in us regarding our own society. We are beginning to develop these reactions to our own society. So consider me now, after having been trained in these institutions, not only trained, but having taught here for several years the very subjects that I was trained in, again at great institutions such as Brown, Harvard, and Princeton. I returned back to Iran. If I want to be very charitable, I'll say, look, I knew nothing else except what was already in me that I could impart to that society. What else could have come out from within me except what I had been taught, what I had been trained in? But what is the problem, if you examine it carefully, is that most of what I was trained in, most of my thought were strange and alien to that society. You see, all the theories we were taught dealt with realities and dealt with time and a location, dealt with an institutional content or cultural content which was totally different than Persia, than the new society I've gone into. Now I've gone into that society to advise. I've gone into that society to lead. Where would I lead this society? What advice would I give to this society except, and that was the most honest thing I could do. That was the only value I had, except the type of thing that I had learned in Europe and in the United States. I remember that I didn't even stop to ask the question as to whether or not there is conflict between what I'm saying and what exists. I was certain that I was saying was right. What I was saying was right. I was certain that what I was saying should be done in my country, because after all, Iran had to become another United States or another European country, another England, and to progress in that manner. I would not stop to think of the conflicts. I would not stop to think of the alienness. I didn't want to. I had no time to consider those aspects. The idea was to superimpose these ways, these systems, these thoughts, these theories on my own society as well, to achieve what I thought would be a better society. But the model that we wanted to reach was this model, the American model, or the English model, or the, not French in my case, not at all. When I look back, now, I begin to remember
how alien I was to them, how alien the thoughts, my thoughts, were to them. I'm not yet making judgment, by the way, about the value of thoughts themselves. I'm simply saying, in this relationship, that I was bringing these alien, strange thoughts to them. Surely there was reaction.
Could you give some live examples of these?
I'm coming to this area of conflicts. For example, take the concept of planning. Today I think that this concept of planning altogether must have been alien to that society and the way of thinking of that society and the mode of behavior of that society. To put it in perspective, let me say, during my heydays, when I was just extremely powerful and I was ruling the waves.
This is one now.
This is the years, let's say, 58, 62 I'm talking about. When the power of a paper coming out of my office was tremendous. It will be carried out. This is the way it was. Some old men who were then member of the High Council of the Plan Organization, who knew my father.
Such as? Who was he?
It was Esfandiari. But I've been trying to think of another old man, Sayyah, Nuri Esfandiari, who was chairman of the council. Sayyah, who used to be with... No, not Hamid. No. He was a general. He was not... He was... Sayyah, who came in with Reza Shah, as a matter of fact, during coup d'etat. This is a tall, elderly man. At the time, 80. Came to my house. After all, I was this young fellow, and this man sat, I never forget this, sat by me next to our swimming pool there. He said, "Son, I've come to give you some advice." And I was extremely polite, of course. Don't forget that. There was no doubt about that. My breeding, my background, I wasn't a stupid person as such. I had given plenty of time, and I would listen. He would say, "Son, don't forget the things that are important in this country is not all these things that you're saying. There are other things which are important to this society and this country." I'd say, "Sir, please tell me. I'm genuinely interested to know what it is." He said, "Son, the first advice I give you is you make friends. The most important thing in this country is to make friends." He would continue with a number of phrases like that. For example, don't make waves, he would say. Don't make waves. Make friends. When I use the example of this old man, please remember there were many of these old men, and when I try to give you their values as they were imparted to me, or what I call the institutional content or the cultural content of the society that was strange to me, and I was trying to understand, and I'm trying to illustrate by these sayings to show the conflict with my own mentality later on. When I use one person's name or two persons, there must have been tens, and over time, this all didn't take place in one occasion, but I'm trying to illustrate for you what happened. The type of things that that came to me through these old men. And within the discussions, sometimes even group discussions, where what I've called the psychological fabric or the dominant psychology within the government, but also within the society. Every dog must have his day. Bide your time and wait for your day. Don't make waves. Live and let live. Everybody must eat at this sofre, at this table. Everybody must eat at this. That is, in the government. The government was a property where everybody had to eat at it. And this shall pass. If you had a problem, if you were concerned, if you were worried, you complained. Don't worry, this will pass too. But don't burn the bridges behind you. Abide. Make friends. Remain in the fold. No one knows what tomorrow will bring. Unless you are in the game, you will never draw for aces. Don't resign. Don't stand on issues. Don't identify yourself or associate yourself openly with issues. نون کسی رو نبرید. بخور و بخورون. Don't cut anybody's sustenance. Everyone must eat at this table. They will never let you do it. Every time we wanted to build a bridge, we wanted to build a dam, they would say, they won't let you do it. I never understood who they was, but they was a very important they was the whole history of Persia. They were the British, they were the Mongolians, they were the Arabs, they were the but now of course I say these things. Principles and rules are abstract and transitory. Human relations are important. I had these type of things, and I can think of 100 of them, to put them in these type of phrases, to illustrate.
These were coming from what type of men?
These were coming from the traditional, older usually, persons who loved me, by the way, who came to advise me. They said, look, don't worry, your time will come. You're bound to become a minister. You're bound to become prime minister. But look, don't forget, we were making noise. We were changing things. We had no time. We were dynamic. We couldn't understand. We had no patience. We wanted efficiency. We talked about productivity. We talked about using procedures, due process. These were our messages from what we had learned. Logic. What logic? Friendship. Don't fire the man. Don't demote the man. Translate into action. What these advices meant, as at least I conjured them up in my own mind. When I listened to these people, I was reading something else into this. They were telling me, no, don't demote anybody. I used to get mad at somebody. He didn't produce the work on time. I was trained that way. I would demote him. Don't fire anybody. The worst sin in Persia, in the Persian democracy, in the Persian bureaucracy, was to fire. Nobody heard of anybody being fired. I was firing. Again, please remember, when I say I'm talking about 5 or 6 other people that immediately come to my mind who were doing the same thing. Taj was one of them. One shouldn't resign. That is, you don't take a stand. Never. Nobody had heard about resignation in government. My God, it's a post that you've got it, enjoy it, stay at it, and until circumstances are such that you cannot. They kick you out or they get rid of you. Don't stand on issues. Don't engage in serious debates. Consultation only in the final analysis, as you wanted to accord dignity, but not in a substantive way. You know, the man would come and say, "Sir, I want to consult with you." But this consultation, there was nothing to it. The consultation was that he wanted me to feel that he held me in great esteem. But what I said to him was not necessarily carried out or done.
He had already made up his mind.
Yeah, absolutely. This didn't matter. He only was smoothing, so to speak, his path to do the type of thing that should have been done or he wanted to do, and so forth. Appoint your friends. Appoint your friends to jobs. Appoint your relatives to jobs. Nepotism. To position of powers. This is your right. When you are given a domain, that's your domain. You gotta take care of your friends, you know. Yes, of course, merit. If I talk about, look, this is brilliant character who's got a PhD from such and such. Yes, but don't put him in a position of power. Lip service to merit only. Protect the enclave. This was to just give you a few examples of the nature of things that I saw at that time, and they were alien to me. You see, now you have two adversarial type of thought. On the one hand, the way I was trained, I was an ambassador of new thought, of a different thought. I'm not saying good or bad, please note this. On the other hand, I face a situation where you have this type of thinking. To give you some further examples. We talked about planning. What does planning involve? The basic thing in planning is, first, observation of the reality around you. Second, logical recording of the reality around you. These are the steps. Third, logical filing of the record of the reality or your observations to make it retrievable and usable. Then you analyze the facts that you have observed with the help of some overall goals. You begin to devise ways of reaching those goals, and the whole thing can be looked at in the most scientific way. Observation was none, very little. Everybody had a pet project. If you began to ask the simplest question about where, why the location of the steel mill should be here instead of there, a very simple question. They didn't have the most elementary knowledge about the why of it. They were lacking in the knowledge. Look, after all, it is important in the case of steel mill, since we were taught We wanted to maximize efficiency, we wanted to maximize return, especially in a country where there was a possibility of saving a poor country. At the time, the savings should have been invested very properly and not wasted on just guesses and projects which would end up totally unproductive or at least forever losing money. They had no information. They had not collected the information. There was no recording. It was in somebody's mind. The individual had gone there and said, I know. Now, how would I know that what he knows is the correct thing? This because I simply, when I said how, when I said why, he was hurt. Because I was questioning the veracity of his statement. And after all, he was a senior man. After all, he was supposed to have his experience. After all, he demanded recognition because of whatever background he perceived to have. So I ran into trouble. In that sense, when I demanded a record, proof, evidence, I did this in the most innocent fashion. I didn't do this to catch the man or to hurt the man, but it was thought unfair of me, improper of me, to demand evidence. Certainly, when it came to analysis, we had lots of people who were engineers as such, and they understood sort of engineering relationships. But it came to cost and benefit, location theory, for example, which is important and relevant. You've got to make estimate of things. You've got to say why you want to do this instead of that when your resources are limited. You've got to choose between investments. They had, of course, no information. And anything you would say didn't set well with them. Not that they didn't understand. Very often they were capable of understanding. Please note, I'm not saying they didn't understand. Because the questions threatened their very positions within the bureaucracy, as it did. So many of them were fired. So many of them were set aside. The whole team, which was in charge of the steel mill, for example, as you will read in this thing that I've written, was set aside ultimately by Ibtihaj. Simply because Ibtihaj suddenly found out, as a result of our analysis, that they had not given the right questions. The team never forgave me. I had no personal enmity towards any one of them. The whole question was that, look, this is no way of doing things. Surely, when you change your modus operandi, you are changing the operators as well. The application of planning, that is, introduction of procedures, introduction of accountability, also threatened the very positions of so many within the bureaucracy. Also was alien. I searched high and low in the whole of Ministry of Finance. You couldn't find or they wouldn't give it to you. That's another thing. Files of individuals. I remember there was an old man in the filing room, and you went into this room, there were piles of gunny sacks full of files that if you had spent a lifetime there, you couldn't organize them in any way useful. Of course, you would give this man some money, and he will go and find the file from someplace for you and bring it. You see, this was his domain. He was protecting himself. But there was no question of public service to which I was used. I thought this is public property. I thought this should be properly organized. I thought this should be retrievable by any minister or anybody who comes in, especially if he had in mind doing some reform in taxation. Not only the files there, but the files in the plan organization as well, which was one of the best institutions in Iran. These were threats to the position of individuals. We were doing things that they hadn't done, they didn't know how to do, or they didn't want things ever to become perhaps that clear. Nobody would take issue with me openly. They would sit quietly, very politely, and smile. And I was shocked. Why not a debate? Please show me I'm wrong. No, so often.
These are people, your superiors or your
They were my seniors, not necessarily superiors. They were my seniors. They were the experienced ones. They were the ones who had grown up in this bureaucracy. They were the ones with 30 years of experience in this bureaucracy.
This would be this...
plan organization, no, in ministries, plan organization, in the High Council. The High Council didn't have that much power as such. The real conflicts were within the internal organization itself. But I want to come back to the basic point that I'm trying to illustrate. Therefore, what I'm trying to say, when you want to institute procedures, that is impersonal procedures, you were doing something alien to them simply because impersonal procedures would not allow the latitude, the flexibility, which was essential in that society to take care of your friends, to take care of the enclave. Procedures may lead to demotions. Procedures may lead to firing. Procedures would threat the sustenance of individuals. You had to come at a certain time. You had to sign your card. There was a revolt when I suggested that people in the plan organization should sign when they come in and should sign when they leave.
Continuation of interview with Dr. Khudadad Farmánفرمائیان, December 14th, 1982, Cambridge, Massachusetts. Dr. Farmánفرمائیان, if you agree, I suggest we begin today's discussion with the event that led to your resignation from the plan organization, and then we can continue from there. This was what, during Amini's cabinet?
Well, let me begin by simply saying that after Ebtaj had gone and Hidayat had become the managing director, but in his case he was also a minister, which was a new practice since by law now the Prime Minister was under the Prime Minister was in charge of the plan organization. The plan organization had continued a good 2 years of serenity and calm, and the third plan was prepared with a whole new concept in my judgment. The third plan was totally different in nature than the second plan. Maybe I did talk about this earlier, but let me quickly review for you the differences. The third plan was not to be just a partial list of projects, as was the case of the first and second plan. The first plan was the third plan was to be a comprehensive plan, which would take into consideration on one side all the resources of the country, and on the other side, all expenditures, including, as a matter of fact, current expenditure, and determine what national saving amounted to for the purposes of investment. And if that national saving was not sufficient to achieve the rate of growth, that was the goal of the plan, which usually was set autonomously or independently from these factors to some extent. Then it would suggest measures for mobilization of new savings, such as, for example, new taxes or borrowing, more borrowing from abroad to supplement the resources of the country for development. As it were, we did find out that the plan, in order to achieve the 6%, had a major deficit. And we began our efforts. And again, a new consideration came to the fore, and that was to try to create a consortium of international agencies and international lenders, which would have included IBRD, probably led by IBRD, and many other countries, European countries, as well as the United States, to provide us a loan to fill in the planned gap. And we went on a mission trying to sell the plan, trying to explain the plans throughout Europe and the United States for its financing. We knew that some of the figures in the plan were underestimated, such as the oil revenues, and over that I had all kinds of difficulties convincing the Minister of Finance that the expected oil revenues were larger than what we had, what the government was anticipating.
Who was the minister at this time?
Now I'm talking about the time that Benyat had already come in. This is now the beginning of Amini. But another point in the third plan, which really is extremely important, is that for the first time we began to say that the ministers, unless ministers and the line ministries, offline ministries, had the responsibility to carry out the projects under their plan, they would never learn how to do these things, and their organizations would never develop to the point that they're capable of doing so. Therefore, we recommended in the plan that execution should go to the line ministries.
Was this solely initiated from within the plan organization?
Solely
or was
initiated.
there pressure from the outside?
Well, obviously there was tremendous pressure from outside, and that's what led to resignation partly of Ebtihaj. Obviously, ministers and members of the parliament were pressing for getting a share of the plan in terms of having responsibility with it. Obviously, the ministers didn't like when Ebtihaj would turn around and say that you are not capable. True or not true, they didn't like it. And they considered themselves a minister of government, responsible, quotes, to the parliament. And as such, they wanted to have responsibility for their particular sectors. That is, the Minister of Roads wanted to do the transportation plan. They carry out the transportation projects relating to his sector. The Minister of Agriculture wanted to do his own job. That was understood to a great extent. That is, their political ambitions in this sense were reasonable ambitions. It was unreasonable because their departments had not developed. Nobody had bothered to develop the departments, to streamline the departments, to bring in new blood into the departments, to develop the technical and economic know-how within the departments to carry out these projects, to implement these projects, or the supervisory functions in these ministries to supervise these functions. So we actually said that we ought to have this frontal now approach to development and give the ministries responsibilities in the execution of the projects. Knowing that we were doing this, the big problem that came up was, all right, if we have made the plan a comprehensive plan, that is, there is no more a fixed amount of all revenue assigned to plan organization by law. And the revenues are therefore principally in the hand of Ministry of Finance. And if the project's execution are going to the ministries, then the plan would remain a hollow shell, an empty shell. It would have no power whatsoever, and nobody in our country is interested in what is written in the document of the plan. The words of the document of the plan were useless, meaningless. Then I began, and this was
this
principally...
going to be a package deal, or is this going to be in bits and parts?
No,
These things
no. This whole thing came up when we were writing the law governing the third plan of Iran, the law enabling act for the third plan of Iran.
So everything was to be in there.
This discussion took place continuously on all these aspects. For the implementation, we suggested the establishment of a high administrative council. And I remember recommending Gudazi, as I said earlier, to who was trained, who was very good in administration, to Amini to become his deputy in charge of that organization outside of the plan. That was done. That was done very early in the game. Next, I began to think in terms of the budget. I said to myself, budget has no meaning whatsoever, anyway, the way it's being done. The heart of the budget is investment part of the budget, and not the current budget, although the current budget had a great deal of power in it. And it was very important. You had to keep up payments of salaries and government costs for various services and functions, including the military. I had the notion that if the budget was in the hands of the planners, the total budget was in the hand of the national budget was in the hand of the planners will be able to administer the budget, to prepare budget in a way as to assure themselves that the third plan projects would not be sacrificed, that in fact they would squeeze out sufficiently out of total national revenue. They would be hard enough for allocation to current expenditures, and what remains then could be properly spent on the budget. So I argued in the newspapers. Later, when I resigned, I wrote articles in the newspapers. These newspapers are available. And I wrote papers within the plan. I established a committee and chaired it myself with Dr. Sirusami in it, who had a great background on budget, a large number. We started to work on a law enabling the government to bring the budget from the Ministry of Finance into plan organization.
I guess my question was, were these separate laws, or were they one law which covered all these questions together, so that they could either be accepted?
Actually, the third plan law does not refer to the budget.
So you sort of we were proposing
that no, but we had the Prime Minister's commitment, agreement. I had already convinced the Prime Minister by long discussions, even before he became Prime Minister, by the way. And as a matter of practice, the first year of Dr. Amini's budget, the whole budget, including the current budget, which is normally done in the Ministry of Finance, was carried out in the plan organization. We did the budget in the plan. We brought the two together, meshed the development and the current budget together. Well, when the law was ready to transfer the budget function, it was about 3 months before the fall of Dr. Amini. And Dr. Amini by then had become rather weak. His government had become rather weak, and there was all kinds of speculation. The town was rife with rumors that the government is going to go. Presumably the Shah had supported Dr. Amini earlier. By now had completely withdrew his support. There was a great deal of opposition in town against Dr. Amini. But we stood firm on his side, and I took the penultimate draft, if you wish, of the budget law to Dr. Amini, to his office one day, and I remember he was sitting alone. I sat in front of him and I started to talk. I saw him very sad and sickly looking. Apparently, he had a fever at the time. He was quite sick, but still sitting behind his desk. I told him that, look, we're ready to go. I must add here that because Dr. Amini wanted to do this, he told me he would not appoint a Minister of Finance after Behni had already resigned.
He will not.
After Behni had already resigned. But suddenly, just a week before this meeting that I was referring to, suddenly I noticed that Amuzegar, Jahangir Amuzegar, was appointed as Minister of Finance.
So that was the first time.
And I anticipated a great deal of problem. Obviously, a new minister coming in, it would be difficult for him to give up half of the function of his portfolio. You know, it would be just impossible.
The most powerful part.
Yeah. Then I went to Amini. And I said, sir, you told me you will not appoint a minister. You have already appointed one. It's too late. Now, before he takes a position, would you please take this law to the Parliament? Or there was no Parliament, was there, at that time?
No.
No. Would you take this through the Cabinet, Council? This was a type of law that had to be taken in by the Minister of Finance. It couldn't just be. It had to be signed by the Minister. It had to be proposed by the Minister of Finance. It wasn't just. If there were no minister, he could have done it. But now it was impossible. Anyway, you know what he told me there? He didn't talk about the minister so much, or this difficulty. Because at the end of the day, he could have told the minister to do it or resign. He said, Khudadad, I don't have the power anymore to do this. These were his words. I remember this. They ring in my ears. And you must remember, I had staked everything on this in the plan organization. I pushed it from the idea of one man down up to the point where now the whole organization was involved in this idea and thought that this will happen. When he said that I have no power to do it, I knew it was already too late, and I thought to myself, then I cannot go back to that organization. It was pride, to be sure. It was a great sense of disappointment that brought me to my following statement, on which I really stayed quite firmly. And that was, sir, I will have therefore to resign my post. It isn't that it has anything to do with you, because I love you. I remember this, saying it to him, because you are a decent man, you are a good prime minister, but I cannot face my colleagues anymore. I cannot go back to that organization because we have staked everything. I have staked everything I had on this matter. As excited as I were about the subject, if you had only cautioned me much earlier, probably it would not have led to such crisis. But now it's too late, and I resign. He got up, and he was extremely unhappy. Now, I saw this with my own eyes. Tears came to his eyes, and so on and so forth. I don't know. Maybe I had become such a problem to him by then that he didn't mind actually me resigning. This, I swear to God, by now even, I don't know. Maybe I had. As it were, the situation was a great drama, as far as I remember, when I resigned. And of course, this made a great noise. I went, packed my things, and walked out of plan organization. Oh, no, sorry. And he said, all right, let's have another meeting on this matter and decide finally. In this meeting, Asfia was present, Purhomayun, the governor of the bank, was present. Sami'i had come from the Ministry of Finance, and not the new minister, because Sami'i was already Siru Sami. If I'm not mistaken, already not appointed, but yes, appointed, I think. Appointed, or anyway, picked up designated for Undersecretary of Finance. Attended the meeting. Gudarzi was in the meeting. Muqaddam was in the meeting. No, Muqaddam? No, because Purhomayun had come from the bank. And Amini chaired the meeting. And I said, he said, would you explain to us why you want to resign? As if he needed some kind of witnesses, or as if it was my trial of some sort. I did explain what I just said to you, that if the plan doesn't have the budget, the plan cannot be a plan. I said, the ministry people cannot do the budget. They're income people. They have never been trained to do so. In fact, only planners can allocate. It's an allocative job. Now, whether they're allocating for current expenditure or for investment expenditure, to be sure, it's different. But the job still can be done by the plan organization. No one came to my defense. Some of these people are dead, such as Purhomayun, who was always, I must say, very decent person. Again, a very nice man, but clean man. And he had learned his stuff of central banking, I had no doubt. He was a professor at the university. I had some arguments with him. And, sorry, Purhomayun was at that time Minister of Commerce. To Amini,
Yes. No, Governor of Central Bank. Koshani had gone, that's right, Governor of Central Bank. Nobody really gave me full support except one man who, in the most outspoken way, as the Undersecretary of Ministry of Finance, supported me, and that was Cyrus Sami. And that was very odd, because after all, I knew the minister would not support me, but he had the courage to do so. So I left and went home. Asfia came to my house, asked me to return. Jamshid Muzagar came, sat there, begged me to return.
Why
Jamshid was sent because of the problem of Jahangir. And Jahangir didn't want to be known or be felt out as the cause of my going. And Amini had asked him, Jamshid knew me extremely well. But we had a lot to do with each other in our meetings of groups and so on. And knew of me. But I did not accept. Once I resigned, that was it. And I had no jobs. Allah insisted that I must go to the Shah at this time, to explain to the Shah why I have resigned. I absolutely refused. And Allah, who was like my father to me always, was extremely disappointed that I wouldn't. I said, as long as Dr. Amini is in office, I will not go to the Shah, because it will then take the form of me going behind the back of the Prime Minister to complain to the Shah about what the Prime Minister has done to me. I said I will not do that. However, shortly after, Dr. Amini resigned and left office, which wasn't long after my departure. It was about 3 months, I think. 2.5 months. I went to the Shah and said, Your Majesty, if I didn't come to see you, it was because I didn't want people to feel that I had a complaint against Dr. Amini, that I was complaining to Your Majesty against your Prime Minister. And this was a principle with me. I didn't do it with the next time either. It was a very improper thing to do. I figured the Prime Minister perfectly capable of telling the Shah what happened. And after all, I was working for the Prime Minister. I wasn't working as such for the Shah. I was a secondary officer. I was, at the time, just the Under Secretary or the second in command in terms for plan organization. I wasn't the minister. I wasn't the top level to go to the Shah. Now, before all of this, there is another.
Did he understand?
I remember. Well, I don't think the Shah. I don't think the Shah was all that excited about the whole concept of budget, going to Minister of Finance, and so on. I did explain all of these things to the Shah and told him my reasons.
What was his reaction?
He just, I remember he turned, he was walking, he said, well, I've always thought you were a man of principle. And I admire people of principle. These are his words. In the light of later things, I never believed this. But this was a statement now, whether this came from his heart, or they were just empty usages. I am not really that certain. I wish I could judge that. My own inclination is to say that he was just being nice to me. That's all. He just said that. I don't think he was about
to bring about such reforms that I was suggesting.
Had you come to know him fairly well?
Oh yes. By that time I'd known the Shah. I've been to him many times. I'd reported to him many times. I'd argued with him many times.
Well, this may not be a bad place to draw a sketch of him as you saw him in 1962.
I will, because there's another instance which relates to this sketching, which I'll go back. Well, let me end this story. I went out into the street. I wrote this little thing that I've given you a copy about, called the formation. What is it called? The formation. I can't read. The formation and
report on formation and development of Economic Bureau 1336 to 1342, submitted to the Ford Foundation by Khudadad Farmafremaiyan.
The Ford Foundation hired me as a consultant to write my own experiences of the Economic Bureau. After all, they had put in a great deal of money into Economic Bureau, nearly over $1 million, to provide economic expertise and advice to the plan organization of Iran, and they wanted to know what happened, what was my view of this effort. And I wrote it, and it's a matter of publication. I don't need to go into that. I did that. I wrote several articles at that time, especially in Kehan International, whole pages of articles regarding these reforms that I'm referring to. It was a very interesting article. But what is interesting is how free the press was, because I was attacking like the whole of the government. This is, we must go back in the earlier years. You know, we talk about repression. My God, things were being published in those days. You know. Well, that's neither here nor there. Going back to a little earlier period, referring to the consortium that I said we wanted to set up to finance the third plan, this took us abroad many times. Also, negotiation of loans took us abroad many times, because the plan organization and the Economic Bureau were in charge of this. But I went on a very special trip to convince the American government to provide budgetary aid to Dr. Amini at the time of Kennedy. And budgetary aid was not anymore the policy of Kennedy, and they were trying to wipe out this budgetary aid business for simply helping the developing countries. They wanted to give only money for projects, and or under public law 480 for other sorts of help, such as supporting the schools, but directly and individually on the merits of each case. However, Dr. Amini's biggest problem was a budget deficit. And we wanted to see what we can do by way of getting aid. Of course, I was arguing that money is fungible. That is, money is not stamped. Money which is being used for development or military or budget, doesn't matter how you allocate it, it's money. We can shift around our own money to be used for current expenses and the money we got from the United States for the purposes of development. The guarantee to ask, or the basic question was whether or not we will carry out those projects. And that was what was
I was after that was what I was pressing. It wasn't a question of whether the money was called budget aid or not. Anyway, I went strongly briefed. I had one of the best negotiation briefs prepared by Dr. Obadian, who came with me also. Just the only man. To Washington. And I remember in the office of the Secretary of State Rusk, this meeting took place where I defended the government position. There must have been about 33, 34 people in the office of Rusk around the table. Rusk came in, said hello to me. He didn't stay for the length of the meeting, but all of his undersecretaries. People from the Treasury, people from the Pentagon, people from the World Bank, people from IMF. This whole room was filled. And I made my presentation to them, made my arguments as strongly as possible. At the end of the day, not there and then, people from the Budget Bureau who knew me because they used to be working with me. The head of the Budget Bureau of Kennedy was a very close friend. Anyway, they asked me many questions, not only relating to economics, but relating to Dr. Amini's government, relating to the politics in Iran, relating to National Front, which at that time now was beginning to have a sort of a younger group that you remember Hossein Mahdavi was in, and Sirus Ghani had something to do with. And these were all my own friends. I knew them so well. The question that I was asked on what I raised this whole thing only to come to this, because then it relates to the Shah later on. They asked me about the National Front, what I thought about the National Front. And very honestly, I told them exactly what I thought. I said to them, the National Front, as such, does not exist as a party. The National Front is a fragmentation of groups or individuals who, if they have time and a chance to develop, they may become a significant political party in my country. And I also answered questions regarding trade policy, regarding development policy, regarding the third plan, went into detail about the third plan. The whole meeting took some 2 hours. This was really a very significant meeting on Iran. After that, we were given considerable amount of aid, by the way, budget support. Told that this is the end. That we were given, but so I came back quite happily to Dr. Amini saying that we have all of these. And as Fia, who was...
By the way, was the ambassador at this meeting?
Adishi Zahedi? Zahedi was there? No.
Anybody from the embassy?
No.
This meeting?
No, nobody. I was the only Iranian. Purposeful. Adishi even left town, I remember, when I came in. And I believe he did it purposefully. He told me later on, I asked him.
He said he had some business to go to San Francisco. He wouldn't, of course, tell me that. I believe I was told later on that I don't know, maybe he didn't want to make my mission sound big. But it was the biggest mission that there ever was.
But normally someone from the embassy always attends these meetings.
Nobody followed me. Nobody came. That's the interesting part.
Am I right that normally someone from the embassy should...
Always. But you're right, in this meeting there was nobody. What was funny though, now that you raised this, I must say, when I returned, as Fio, and I went to the Shah for me to, and Amini had apparently urged this.
And urges.
Maybe Amini, for one reason, wanted me to go and report, and that was the fact that we were successful in getting aid. Wanted the Shah to know, to feel better about the situation, and I so did, and he did feel better. He said, but while I was talking to the Shah, I said, what other questions did they ask? You know, as always, being the state, shooter, and I simply said, sir, they asked me about the National Front. He suddenly turned and was very tense. He said, what did they ask you about the National Front? I said, sir, they asked me whether or not they were strong enough. He said, what did you say? I said, sir, no, they are not strong enough. They do not exist as a party. These are fragments and individuals. However, and this is the part he didn't like to hear at all. However, if they are given a chance to develop, they can become a strong party. I had never seen the Shah like this. He turned white, completely white. And of course, Askia was sitting with his head down, not saying one word throughout the whole meeting. I mean, this was his usual tactic or system. So now when we go back to
Did you realize what you were doing? I mean, when you
I swear I didn't. I was just so straight. Only later on I realized what I had done. Much later on I realized what I had done. Much later. But still it shows the atmosphere. Still it shows that an officer of the government could have honestly told the Shah what he thought. Or he didn't kick me out. He didn't kick me out. I don't know what he told Dr. Amini afterwards regarding this conversation. Maybe he thought I was just a naive young officer who did no beans about Iranian politics and said this type of thing to Americans, of whom, to whom he was deeply sensitive of the Americans. I wasn't. I didn't care. I just told them what I felt about my country, and I told the Shah exactly the same thing. There was nothing hidden in between, and I spoke my straight. Now that I look back, may have been that when in his room he said, you are a man of principles. Maybe he had this in mind. I also suspect that certainly the desk people at the State Department must have given the story to the ambassador, to Zade, without a doubt. And that the Shir would have cabled it. Now, I think about these things only now.
So the Shah already knew what he was asking.
Where they had stressed this particular aspect, I don't know. I haven't seen these reports. They're in the archives. I can go and check the archives. One day one ought to go and ask for free information and get this information and find out what the hell was going on during this period. I will. If I ever write about this period, as I plan to, I'm going to go and get all this business. Because someplace it has to be shown. I want to find out, what did the Americans think of me? Because from those archives, it'll be quite known and clear. They used to call us the American chickens or the American boys or this type of thing. I can speak until I'm blue in the face to defend myself that I was never an American boy. I was always a Persian boy in the full sense of the word. Young I was. Boy I may have been. But American I never was. You see, I will pull out one day all of these archives, and I have a right to them. But I want to wait. I'll do that in good time as I organize myself so I can use them properly. By the way, the day I resigned, I remember an officer of the embassy telephoning me in a big hurry. Said, please, maybe come and see you. I'll give you the name. His name was John Walsh, who later became ambassador to Kuwait, as a matter of fact. When I resigned to Amini. And I said, of course. He said, may I bring someone else? I said, who? He said, Maury Williams. Maury Williams was the head of the Point 4. By then I'd become AID, I think. Who is now a very important man who heads what is called Food and Agriculture Committee or something of this sort in Rome, related to FAO, to which Americans give considerable support for hunger, to support nutrition programs throughout the world. These two came and sat across from me, started questioning me why I resigned. I said to them, what's your business? He said, sir, it's very important for us because you've been presenting the case of Iran in Washington on these matters, and you've said so many things. We want to know whether or not your resignation to those matters, and the question is, if those things that you have committed yourself, and as representative of Prime Minister, and I was bona fide representative, accredited representative of Prime Minister of Iran when I was talking about these things. We want to know whether or not these matters are going well, and so on. Where I talked about the budget again, I talked about my fears about the plan, and left it at that.
Did you feel that they could influence the Shah to accept this idea of budgetary control by the plan organization?
The Americans? I never even used the Americans. Don't forget, I had convinced the American advisors who were against it. This is interesting again what I want to tell you. I never felt that, for example, Ed Mason at Harvard, who had come at this time and talked to me, I never felt Ed Mason supported the idea. I argued with Ed. I sat down for hours trying to convince Ed. And nobody could argue with me because I was so well prepared. I'd made it a business to be prepared on the argument of why the budget should come to the plan organization. As it were, it was a successful effort. Because the next government
following Alam, that is, after Amini, uses this very concept as a reform concept, and brings the budget from Ministry of Finance into the plan organization. And that was Mansour's government. So it happened. And the force of an idea is so important, you know. The idea remained alive. They couldn't kill the idea. And finally it happened. And it then became the plan and budget organization of Iran, as you're fully aware. Anyway, I walked the streets for nearly a year. Sami, I remember at that time, was co-managing director of the Industrial and Mining Development Bank of Iran.
This is
Mehdi Sami. And asked me if I would help him with a conference on, had to do with economics and projects and banking. And I accept to sort of be chief of staff for him on that. And I had a little work that way, which helped me, kept my mind busy on these matters. We used to prepare, I remember I used to sit down there, write articles for people to, or speeches for people to give before the conference. It was all in English, mind you. And after a short while, Sami was, Alam proposed Sami to become the governor of Central Bank.
Before we get to that part of your career, could we now go back and ask you to sketch your impressions of the Shah,
Of the Shah.
as a monarch, as a ruler, as a manager, as a
Do
person?
you want it done to this point, or would you not?
I think it'd be interesting to compare what you felt at this point and the way you saw it, and then we can again ask you to do this when we get to
For the whole
1970,
period.
and then perhaps compare. Now, at this point, just
By this time,
impressions
at
and
this
results.
time, I always felt, and I'm being very honest, maybe I'm glad you asked me this question. At this moment of time in history, I felt the Shah was the greatest refuge I had. I felt the Shah was the ultimate. I felt the Shah capable of understanding what we young reformists were saying, far more than anybody else. Even at times I felt, although maybe I was wrong, but what I felt that he understood better than Dr. Amini what we were talking about. The only major point that in my heart separated me from the Shah during this period, the only thing in my heart, now I'm talking about my heart, was this whole preoccupation with military. We hated militarism. We did. This was the truth. And when I say we, this group of reformers, we didn't believe Iran should be spending so much money on military. And we had made it clear around. Sirus Sami Muqaddam and I signed an open letter to the Shah. We went that far, representing this group, so to speak, presuming to represent this group, signed a letter to the Shah to the effect that, Your Majesty, what is important is a sound economy. An army cannot be built on the basis of a crisis-ridden, underdeveloped economy.
Was this published anywhere?
It was an open letter. Now, obviously, it wouldn't get published in the newspapers. We would just send it directly to the Minister of Court. We had a copy of this. I don't know whether a copy exists in these archives. That's what I'm trying to search. So far, all the archives I've looked, I haven't found it. What happened? But it wasn't important. It was another letter to us. What is significant, we didn't do this in those times as a matter of keeping our historical records straight or showing our political position. No. We did